Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Khalil Jahshan. I would like to welcome you to this special event regarding current developments in Palestine. We're delighted that you have decided to join the hundreds of registrants worldwide who are taking part in today's important discussion. Arab Center Washington, D.C., ACW, is pleased to convene this webinar entitled, Where Does the Palestinian National Movement Go From Here?, including distinguished guests with extensive experience in Palestinian political life as academics, activists, leading political figures, to discuss the future of the Palestine national movement at this extremely critical and challenging juncture in modern Palestinian history. Today's discussion will follow a conversational format and will address the current state of war in Gaza and the West Bank, the humanitarian crisis affecting the daily lives of the 5.5+ million inhabitants, the prevailing public opinion in both territories, and examine current socio-political and economic challenges facing the Palestinian body politic under Israeli occupation, and explore available or new options for the continuing Palestinian national struggle for self-determination and independence that remain unfulfilled. Throughout our conversation, our panelists will provide their expert views and perspectives on the prospects for Palestinian national movement in the wake of the continuing war on Gaza, its spread to the West Bank, the legitimacy crisis facing the Palestinian Authority, and international calls for reforming, on the one hand, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and particularly, or more specifically, the Palestinian Authority, and extend its rule over both the West Bank and Gaza. To help us decipher all these issues, we are honored to have with us this morning, in alphabetical order, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, Chair of Birzeit University Board of Trustees. Hanan doesn't need an introduction to an audience like this, but she's a renowned Palestinian political and civil society leader, academic scholar, author, legislator, democracy and human rights activist, in previous incarnations, a negotiator and negotiating team spokesperson, PLO executive committee member, and Minister of Higher Education and Research, among other things. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, Palestinian physician, health and political activist, leader in the Palestinian People's Party, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, member of the Palestine Legislative Council, again in previous incarnation, member of the PLO Central Committee, and Minister of Information at one point. And he has been all over the media trying to explain Palestinian perspectives these days. So I would call him Honorary Minister of Information even at this time. Dr. Layla Farsakh, political economist, a professor of political science at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Layla's academic expertise include, of course, Middle East politics, comparative politics, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Last but not least, my good friend, Dr. Khalil Shikaki, professor of political science and director of the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, PCPSR. Khalil has conducted more than, if my memory serves me correctly, more than 200 plus public opinion polls in Palestine, making him definitely the premier pollster in the Palestinian territories or in Palestine. In his academic career, Dr. Shikaki has served here in the United States in service institutions of higher learning, senior fellow at Brandeis, and also served in Palestine as Dean of Scientific Research at Najah University. In terms of logistics, real quickly, we have earmarked, due to the complexity and seriousness of the topic, 2 hours for this event. The first hour will be spent in the art of conversation with our guest. As a moderator, I will be directing some questions from myself and from you guys in the audience. And the balance of our time will be spent, the second hour, most of it, on answering your own questions. The event will conclude at 12 noon sharp Eastern Standard Time. Questions are welcome from all of you attending this program anytime during the program. You may use the Q&A feature on your Zoom page or send them via events events@arabcenterdc.org. Again, events@arabcenterdc.org. They will be forwarded to me as a moderator, and I will be more than glad to present them specifically to the speaker you would like to address. Please identify yourself, your affiliation, if possible, and direct your question to a specific speaker if you so choose. Before we proceed in the conversation, let me just say that today marks the 195th day of Israel's war of vengeance and genocide against the people of Gaza. More than 34,000 people, as we all know, 34,000 Palestinians have been killed, including more than 14,000 children. Around 8,000 people remain missing. 2 million have been displaced, and at least 76,500 injured, while over 1 million, as we speak, are facing catastrophic food insecurity, despite all kinds of international offers and efforts to try to rectify that situation. Meanwhile, Israel and the United States behind it, and other countries, frankly, have been discussing ad nauseum a potential ceasefire that could lead the parties to what they refer to as the day after in Gaza. And considering various options in this regard, especially dictating the future of the Palestinians without their input. I mean, we've seen this movie as Palestinians many times before since 1948, and it's unfortunate that after all this bloodletting, we have to go back to watching the same show again. At the same time, the current Palestinian political landscape, unfortunately, remains divided and precarious, leaving the Palestinian people without credible, effective, and universally accepted representation or leadership to lead them out of this unprecedented existential crisis. My first question is going to be to all four guests, and it's going to be general, just in terms of your perspective with regards to the current crisis. The ongoing war in Gaza, ladies and gentlemen, is not the first war that Israel has waged in recent years against the people of Gaza. How do you personally view the 23-24 war as compared to previous wars? Is this war different? Does it represent unique challenges to the Palestinian people, different from the past? So again, if you could focus, in a couple of minutes on your own personal perspectives, and I would like to start with Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. Hanan, please.
Yeah, thank you, Khalil. It's great to be with you and with such distinguished company and good friends. Thank you for the invitation. Your question actually is very relevant because many people see this in many ways as a continuation or a culmination of the Nakba that started in 48 or the Zionist agenda that started before 48, of course, coming to a culmination as a fundamentalist, ideological, exclusivist, racist ideology. But there are also those, and many of us, who see this as something that has within it the utmost of inhumanity, of cruelty, a genocide that is taking place in plain sight, as everybody says. And it has taken the Zionist ideology not just to its normal end or extreme levels, but it has also added to it in many ways the fact that the impunity that it has enjoyed, the fact that the lack of protection of Palestine, the dehumanization and demonization of the Palestinian people, the fact that Israel can do no wrong, and that if it enjoys all this support from the West and from colonial powers, that it can reach this or sink to this level of genocide, of carnage, of total destruction, of eradication, of erasure. I mean, before they used to think of erasure as something symbolic, in the sense that you want to get rid of an identity or a history or a culture. But now you accompany this with a physical erasure, the killing of people, the destruction of their schools and so on, so the erasure of their future, the destruction of hospitals and so on, so the predetermining the nature of Palestinian not just geography, but of course demography in the future and so on. So the extent to which the cruelty and the carnage and the genocide have gone, that is the real issue. It is bringing home the Nakba, but at the same time taking it to different dimensions, to the point where now Israel's behavior has become a real threat to not just to regional stability, not just to Palestine and the Arab world and so on, including now you have Iran involved, you have other countries involved, but also I think it has become really a global challenge. And it is challenging the international multilateral system, the global rule of law. It is threatening, actually, what was perceived as a world order, which was never orderly and never had an order. But it has taken power to the extreme and dehumanization to an extreme. And going on the rampage like this without any curbs or accountability is extremely dangerous. And we can talk about all the ramifications, but it is not a contained, just anti-Palestinian initiative or program, but it is also a program of domination and of destroying whatever existed of a legal system in the world.
Thank you, Hanan, for starting us on this in the right path. We're going to come back to some of these points in a bit. Mustafa, what's so different from your personal perspective about this war?
Well, thank you first of all for inviting me, and greetings to everybody. I will not go into the details of what's happening because I think it's well known for everybody. But let's look at the conclusions. The first one is that this is larger than the first Nakba. And I mean, just compare the massacres that took place during the first Nakba with each attack in each little community in Gaza is bigger than the massacre of Deir Yassin. So the level of atrocity is beyond description. Second point is that this war has exposed the real goal of Israel. It is a very clear message to all Palestinians, to the world, that Israel not only does not want two-state solution, does not want one-state solution, they have one solution to the fact that we have now 7 million Palestinians living on the land of historic Palestine, equal, if not a little bit more than Israeli Jewish people. And the Israeli solution is ethnic cleansing. In steps or in one big hit, but ethnic cleansing is the Israeli real goal. Third, for the first time, and regardless of how extreme different Israeli governments were before, this time we are dealing with a fascist government. And it's not just a fascist government, it's a whole society that has moved towards fascism. And I would say what you see now in the Israeli society is very similar to what happened to Germany during the Nazi time. It's not just the leaders, it's not just the extremists, it's the whole population which was hit on the 7th of October and suddenly shifted in the most possible extreme way to this fascist approach to Palestinians. They don't accept us as human beings, basically. And I'm not talking about the leaders, I'm talking about the ordinary citizen in Israel. Third, next point is definitely this is very different in terms of the relationship to the international community. The international community, which is called the international community, whatever is called the international community, has shown us very deep split between the people and the governments. And this split on the Palestinian issue is growing further and further. In some countries like the United States, we've seen a shift that is unprecedented. There is a whole generation that has been energized or re-energized at Palestinian, at Arab, at international level. But that's one story. The government's positions is a different story. And the reality is that this war has shown that the international community has sent us two messages. First of all, the Western governments are absolutely biased to Israel. Second, there is nothing called international law. It's not applied. And what you see is a complete double standard. And as if international politics have gone back to the 19th century. This whole talk about international law and human rights is over. The Arab reaction and Muslim reaction is also absolutely disappointing. It's not surprising, it's not new, and it's not because of Hamas, by the way. It's a very big mistake to think that they are taking this position because they only want to get rid of Hamas or because they don't like Hamas. No, they don't like the Palestinian resistance, the right of the Palestinians to struggle for their freedom. It disturbs the situation. It challenges these regimes. It puts them in the corner. It obliges them to expose their alliance with the United States and sometimes with Israel. And that is, of course, a very serious development. I don't know what will be the impact eventually, but I think anybody who is in a responsible position here would be deadly mistaken if they don't remember what happened after 1948 in the Arab world. Yeah. Finally, it was a big failure of the Palestinian Authority, unprecedented, and a big failure of the leadership of the PLO, which is the official leadership. I'm not including everybody, of course, but the official leadership, the established authority, failed drastically. And that's why, of course, now it has very poor status in terms of legitimacy and in terms of people's support. I'll stop here and then we can talk.
Thank you, Mustafa. We'll come back to some of these points in a bit. Leila, from your vantage point here in the US, could you give us your own perspective and maybe if you could say a few things about the US role, we would appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think what Hanan and Mustafa said was very comprehensive. I think I would add only two things to what is so unique about this war or what is special. And I think is that we have to bear in mind this has been the longest war between Israel and this is the longest war in the Arab-Israeli conflict since 1948. And this we should not undermine because it's major and because also it's the longest war conducted between a non-state actor and a state. Which is very also important to bear in mind because this non-state actor is a national movement, whether we like it or not, irrespective of what we think of Hamas. But it's a reaffirmation of the Palestinian persistence in defending their right to liberation and their ability to conduct this resistance, costly as it is, to still persevere in it and cause Israel some major damages that other wars have not been able to create. So this we should not undermine because we are in a new reality in a certain way. Also, I do think that the importance of this war and what is unique about it in a certain sense, apart from what was said by Hanan and Mustafa, the gravity it is of it, the ethnic cleansing, the intention, it is, though, a war bringing us back to 1948, insofar as it is bringing us back to the essence of the conflict. And the essence of the conflict is about who has right in this land of Palestine, and how are these rights going to be manifested and defended. And I think this is a point that we should not forget. Palestinians are fighting for the right to exist, not for the right to be just human beings and have a humanitarian solution. They are fighting for the right to exist, and they will never give up the right for their freedom. I think this is something very important, and it comes at the heat of 30 years of peace process that actually did not provide this freedom. So if we look at it that way, this war brought us back to the 1948 moment, not to the 1967 moment, is something very important. At the time, it's also making us reevaluate what have we done the past 30 years. This doesn't mean rejecting the Palestinian state, but it does mean we need to take stock of what have we achieved, and in line of what was said just previously about the failure of the Palestinian leadership, and in a sense also the failure of the Palestinian state project. We need to think in new ways, building on what we have achieved. And what we have achieved so far is there is an international recognition of the Palestinian right to live, to sovereignty, to independence, but there is also a clear reality in front of us that the two-state solution has been smashed once and forever. and we need to think in different terms, precisely because the Palestinians are not giving up despite the failure of the leadership. Now, as to the question, your specific question about the US, I think this war shows very clearly how the US is both becoming marginal and being dragged into this war again. I mean, the US, as we all know, have been wanting to get away from the region. This war brought it back in. Its performance has been incredibly disappointing, if not outright hypocritic and against international law, but it's also not serving US interest. And I will not go into this right now, but I think the US position is showing actually a failure of vision and a failure of an ability to implement a viable solution that can save American lives, forget Palestinian lives, of upholding international law. And paradoxically, US policy is contributing to the changing regional configuration. We are entering a new regional configuration that we did not have on October 6th. And that's something to bear in mind, especially with the latest Iran attack. We are witnessing a major change regionally, which will have major impact on the Arab region, which have been very disappointing, as was explained. But we are at the cusp of a new reality we cannot understand, and this is why the war is being ferocious. But this is also why we have a very important role to play, all of us, in upholding Palestinian right. And also I would say on the society level in America, we've seen an incredible activism that has ensured that the Palestinian question is right and center in ways that reaffirm the role of the diaspora in a way that people thought inside Palestine was no longer relevant or can only play a contributory role. It's actually the diaspora proved that it has an important role to play, and it's actually playing it. And this needs to be taken into consideration in all discussions about how we're going to revive the PLO and how we're going to redefine the Palestinian national project. So I'll stop it there.
Sure. Thank you, Leila. Khalil Shikaki, I don't want to deprive you of the option to comment on your colleagues, but I would like for you, in addition, to take this opportunity. I did, in looking at your latest public opinion poll, number 91, you did have several questions regarding Palestinian perception of the war and interesting differences between how it's perceived in Gaza and how it's perceived in the West Bank. Could you take 3 or 4 minutes to kind of summarize at one point the parameters of those perceptions? Thank you.
Sure. And good to be with you, Khalil, and friends and colleagues. I also want to say something about what is unique about this war. Everything is unique about this war. It's not just the massive civilian destruction, the failure of the international community. There's no doubt that this is the first time that since Hamas took over Gaza, that Israel has finally decided that it wants to exterminate Hamas. This has never been the Israeli position. Israel and Hamas found themselves having common interests during the past years since 2007. This is a huge change with regard to Israeli strategy on how to deal with the Palestinian issue. Israel does not have an alternative to the strategy that was based on Hamas' continued control over Gaza. But this is certainly a major change compared to all the other conflicts. I will come back to public opinion, which is also different this time than it has been at any other time. But there are other major differences, and not all of them are negative. Some of these differences are actually positive. Some of this Leila have highlighted that we have never seen at the level of international public opinion the kind of skepticism about what Israel is doing in any previous war as we are currently seeing. There is no doubt that there is a sea change, I would say, in public opinion in most countries of the world, including the US. Which shows the least change, but nonetheless, there is change even there, in which there is a significant criticism of what Israel is doing. There is much greater sympathy at the level of public opinion at the international level. There are other differences that we don't have time to get into. I want to address your question, which, as I said, in all previous wars, we have seen public opinion shifting. And nonetheless, this is the time when the shift was most fundamental. The support for Hamas, for example, increased in the West Bank. And the first survey we did after the war, which was late November, early December, the support increased 3.5 times from 12% to 44% in the West Bank. This is a huge change in the attitudes of the Palestinian public regarding Hamas. Now, normally, the Palestinians pick the parties or the groups and the movements they support based on their value system. When conditions are those of no war, no peace, there is no progress in peace, and there is no war ongoing. Value system dominates, and the Palestinians essentially have two value systems, maybe at best three. One is Islamist, and those are approximately 1/3 of the Palestinians, and most of those represent the base for Hamas's support. If people are to vote their values, 1/3 of the Palestinian society would vote for Hamas, and 2/3 would vote for others. Now, but of course, conditions are not normal. It is either status quo, war, or progress. Oslo represented progress. When Oslo took place, the shift was fundamental away from Islamism, at least for a decade. We've seen people moving away. The Palestinian national movement actually gained significantly as a result of the Oslo Agreement, and attitudes shifted. Support for the two-state solutions, support for Arafat and Fatah increased considerably in the early years of the Oslo process. With the failure of the process, with the second intifada erupting, support started to shift back. People became more religious. Islamism was on the rise during the second intifada, which then helped Hamas win the elections in 2006. Since then, however, there really hasn't been any significant change in the value system of the Palestinians. If progress is made in the peace process, secular nationalists who represent the base for the support for the nationalists or non-Islamists gain when there is progress in the peace process, or win governance, when the secular nationalists are not corrupt, when they are Democrats, when they are able to deliver basic needs and services, they gain. They don't win hearts and minds of Islamists. Now, think of the opposite. When there is conflict and war, normally it is conflict and war since 2007, since Hamas took over Gaza. It is a conflict that Hamas leads. It is not the secular nationalists. When that happens, secular nationalists shift support immediately to Hamas. Again, this does not happen when it is secular nationalists who are gaining. Secular nationalists can only gain the support of the secular nationalists. Islamist movements can gain the support of the secularists almost immediately when there is war. They stand with Islamists. This is what happened, exactly what happened with this war, as in every other war. It takes about 6 months for people, secular nationalists, to go back to their bases. But for at least 6 months, they stay in support of Islamists, in this case, Hamas. This war has actually shown various transformations. Immediately, we have seen significant rise in support for Hamas among secular nationalists in the West Bank, as I said, 3.5 times increase in the support, but not in Gaza. We have not seen secular nationalists in Gaza giving Hamas more support than they did before the war. And in fact, about 6 months later, 5 months later, in March, Gaza actually, 1/4 of Islamists in Gaza declined to give Hamas support. Hamas has lots of support in Gaza, but not in the West Bank. It still has, so today's support the value system in Gaza is different than that of the West Bank. We would normally expect 40 to 45% of Gazans to support Hamas. This is because the base is much wider. In the West Bank, the base is much more limited, 15 to 20%, not more. That's Islamism in the West Bank. This war increased the support for Islamism in the West Bank. Again, people are not changing their values. They are simply supporting a political movement or a party that belongs to the Islamist value system, that is Hamas. The support in the West Bank increased, as I said, to 44% from 12% just before the war. Today, it stands at 1/3. So even in the West Bank, support has declined. Now, without me getting into the details, I don't have the time. You only give me a few minutes, but I took all of those already multiple times. But I can explain why the change in the West Bank took place and why it has now declined, given the opportunity later on. But there's absolutely no doubt that accompanying that has been the huge decline in the popularity of the Palestinian Authority. Again, this is, by the way, one of the most important changes compared to all previous wars. The absence of the complete irrelevance of the Palestinian Authority and its leadership from the conflict with Israel today is absolutely so pronounced that the Palestinian Authority has lost almost 90% of its legitimacy and public support, including 2/3 of secular nationalists who would normally support it. They are denying it. Supporters of Hamas no longer support Abbas by a large majority. This is a fundamental change in the attitudes. Nonetheless, one last point, if you give me one more minute. When the support for Hamas declined in the last 3 months, it did. We saw that in March, both in West Bank and Gaza. Where did those people go who no longer supported Hamas? They certainly did not go to Fatah. Fatah and or Abbas. Fatah and Abbas did not gain a thing during this period. So where did they go? They went to Marwan Barghouthi. Marwan Barghouthi's popularity increased considerably as a result of people basically abandoning, some people, not all people, some people abandoning both the secular nationalist leadership and political party Fatah and abandoning Hamas at the same time. They went to Marwan Barghouthi, another secular nationalist. So in essence, we now for the first time see some Islamists in Gaza willing to support a secular nationalist leader that we have not seen before, but the established political leadership and the established political party are gone. The support has never been as low as it is today.
Well, thank you, Khalil, very much.
Can I ask Khalil something?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
May I interject here? This is very interesting. I read the polls, and they are always extremely informative, your polls, but that also indicates that the Palestinian people as a whole are looking for an alternative.
Yes.
That as a whole, they're not happy with Hamas, they're not happy with Fatah or even the secular nationalists. There's a real crisis in a dysfunctional political system that has failed to deliver to the Palestinian people. And I think this is the real crisis. We have a system that's not only dysfunctional, but that has atrophied. We have leadership that does not enjoy credibility or legitimacy, as you said. All the little factions or political parties and so on have no standing, have no credibility, have no constituency on the ground. Remember when there were elections, we ended the prospect of election. 36 electoral lists, were formed instantly. Of course, Marwan was part of them. But I think maybe Marwan is chosen because I don't believe there's a Deus ex machina or there is one savior. But I think because Marwan has not been implicated in any of the problems and the shortcomings of all the political system, he's been tucked away in jail as a real victim. And before he went, actually, he did enjoy support before he went to jail, but it has increased because people are looking for alternatives. And I don't believe looking for one person only, but maybe if elections were allowed to take place, you would have seen the emergence of new leadership because all the old leadership, even within the parties and factions, have not revitalized themselves. They haven't had internal elections, really. They haven't produced an agenda or a national program that would capture the imagination and hearts and minds of the Palestinian people. So to me, that's a real problem. I don't know if in your polls you say, hypothetically, if there were a new party or new parties or whatever, or factions that would answer the needs of the Palestinian people, that would respond to the inclusivity that we need. As you said, Layla, in Palestine, in exile, expats, refugees, and so on, and people and Palestinians in 48 Palestine, that we are all one totality, and therefore we have to formulate our own political national agenda that would not just repeat and regurgitate the slogans of the past, but would in a way meet the requirements of the future.
Khalil, you want to respond briefly?
Yes, I can respond quickly by saying there is no such alternative right now. There is nothing that is being presented to the public that the public is looking at to support. No ideas and no leadership. So far, this is what we are finding. However, one reason for that is that it is extremely difficult to gain legitimacy and support from the Palestinian public. The requirements for legitimacy are daunting, and you have to be a fighter, you have to be a service deliverer, and you have to be a Democrat, and you have to be a lot of things for the public to really trust you. And right now, the quarrel with the Palestinian public is not over the agenda of the national movement per se. That agenda, as declared, it's not the real agenda that is implemented, but the declared agenda is not the one. It is the leadership, it is the behavior of that leadership, it is the behavior of the institutions. This is why when people, as we have seen here, and we've seen that in the past as well, turn to Marwan Barghouti, even though Marwan has not done anything or been seen during the last 6 months. So he hasn't done anything on his own, but the public is looking up to him as a kind of savior, and will support any political party that he can lead. And that tells us that it's not really about the message. It is that people want clean, unifying leadership that they can trust. And it seems that Marwan is now seen as representing that leadership. Would somebody else be able to do that? Well, again, you have to fight and successfully, and you have to have an organization that is able to mobilize the public, and that is not easy to do. And then you have to then deliver on all the expectations of the public. So far, no one has been able to do that, despite the fact that almost 40% of the secular nationalists are just sitting on the sideline and waiting for that leadership to emerge.
Mm-hmm. Women,
Thank
youth.
you. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Hanan, if it's quick.
No, I'm just asking about women and youth, because all our leadership is geriatric and has been for a long time, and has really prevented other generations, not just one generation, from reaching office or from leading. And it has used the various ways of exclusion. Women, the same thing. And I see some powerful, magnificent women. When we had elections possibility, I worked with many women from all lists, from all factions. And they were amazing. I mean, it's just, we have the capacity, we have the ability, and yet where are they in the political system? So that people,
particularly the youth, Hanan. I think I'm glad you emphasize that the majority of Palestinians are under that category, and yet they're not involved in the process. Layla, let's shift gears here a little bit. I would like you to comment on the sidelining the military escalation right now, sidelining Gaza a bit, the military escalation between Iran and Israel. And the so-called negotiations for a ceasefire are still underway in Cairo. Yesterday, one of the mediators, Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, admitted that the talks have largely stalled. Today, I'm surprised by his announcement that just came through the Times of London, basically saying that Qatar is reassessing its role as mediator in the Gaza negotiations. That is a big surprise in the absence of probably an alternative for shepherding these talks. But at any rate, why have these talks been largely unproductive? How come, we've been trying to conclude at least just an immediate ceasefire, for God's sake. And unlike past conflicts where it happened in the past, some kind of hudna or ceasefire or something was reached, but this time empty-handed. Why?
That's the 100 million question. Why there's no deal? I mean, I think there are more people more privy to the negotiation to why they failed, but analyzing it from outside, what I see the reason for the failure of the negotiation is because Israel is really stuck. Israel does not have a solution and does not want to have anything as an interpretation of a Hamas victory, whatever that means. Like when I was hearing the other day, the ex-US ambassador to the US saying, an unconditional ceasefire, which is what Hamas is asking, is a recognition that Hamas won, which I find completely absurd because I don't know how Hamas has won after 34,000 people being killed, and how an unconditional ceasefire, which has staged over three periods, which is what Hamas was proposing, is considered unviable. So I think it's the obstinance of Israel that does not have a solution to Gaza and does not have a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and is trying to cultivate a feeling among Israelis that the only way they can exist is through war, and that this war is going to prolong for a very long time. So I see more, it's Israel's refusal to stop the war because it has no solution for the day after, and because Hamas, or I like more to call it the Palestinian resistance, has proved that they are persevering. And also because I think now the regional configuration has changed. I mean, the entry of Iran, whether we like it or not, because of Israel's attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Israel has provoked this crisis. The US is furious about it because it does not want a war. But we are witnessing now a adjusting of trying to understand how are the rules of the game going to change. So I don't think any escalation with Iran will obfuscate the situation of Gaza or will make people ignore the situation of Gaza, although Israel would want to do that. Because what I see what's happening right now is we're heading towards, without US pressure, you're not going to end the war.
Yeah.
And without a vision of what Israel has to do afterwards with the Palestinian, there is no end to that. The big problem I see is how aid is going to be conditioned, because the big problem right now, and as this is also Israel's intention, is to turn again the Palestinian question into a humanitarian crisis, not into a political crisis. So we'll be busy over the next 6 months. How many trucks come in? Did we divert the famine or we did not divert the famine? How do we push Israel to allow more trucks in? So I think, and also I think Qatar's latest announcement reveals that there is something else happening regionally, and we will have to wait and see.
Thank you, Layla. Dr. Mustafa, do you believe Israel has failed to achieve its objectives, and that's why it's not cooperating with the US or with any other party to try to reach an immediate ceasefire because of its failure to achieve its 3 or 4 objectives that we started with? Unmute, please.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I think Israel did not achieve its goals, and probably it will not achieve its goals. And more than that, I think this war has, I don't want to say it's the only real war between Palestinians and Israel, but or Arabs and Israel, with the exception maybe of the October war, 1973, which didn't really finish in the right way. But what happened on the 7th of October has shown that Israel is not undefeatable, and it's not almighty, and it has lots of vulnerabilities. And actually, the attack from Iran, although some people are making jokes about it, actually also exposed Israel as a country that cannot defend itself. It required American intervention. It required some Arab countries' intervention. The funniest thing I heard yesterday was I was with Piers Morgan again, and an Israeli person, and I think she's from Likud party, was saying, what are you talking about? Jordan came to the defense of Israel. I mean, look at that. I mean, when we reach this point, you can imagine what's going on inside the Israeli mentality, actually. So I'm not underestimating the amount of crimes that Israel has done, but in reality, let's look at their goals. First, they said they will extract and destroy resistance. They failed. They wanted to impose their control over Gaza. Up till now, they're not even controlling Beit Hanun. They said they will bring back their hostages or prisoners of war, as I call them, and by force, and they couldn't. The main goal that Israel had in this war, and I hope it remains in this manner, has failed, which is to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. And that didn't work because up till now, Israel could not get the cooperation of some Arab countries. But more important, it's because of the fantastic, heroic resilience of the Palestinian people. We have medical teams working now in Gaza, about 35 medical teams, and all over Gaza, in the north, in the center, in the south. They are heroes, really. I mean, 600 to 700,000 people remained in the north of Gaza, including Gaza City. When there was during the attack, the Iranian attack on Israel, to your knowledge, the road between the north and the south was suddenly open. The army disappeared. And suddenly an influx of families went back to the north. And we're talking about thousands of people before the army realized what was going on and started shooting people. And they killed, I think, 10 people in the process. So I believe the resilience of the Palestinian people is unbelievable. I know there are lots of criticism about so many things, but in reality, I don't think Israel has succeeded in its approach. That doesn't make them less dangerous. And that doesn't make them less dangerous in the West Bank, because you've seen the atrocities of these illegal settlers. There is one very important statistic, which is that since the 7th of October, the Israeli settlers have evicted more than 21 Palestinian communities in Area C. That's to be added to 30 other communities that were evicted before the 7th of October. So we are witnessing here an increased amount of, I call it fascism, and fascist behavior by the Israeli army and Israeli settlers. But the reality is that up till now, Israel failed. And I think much of the anger of the Biden administration at Israel, and Blinken for sure, he's so angry at this, that Israel has failed. We gave you 100 days, 150 days, now 200 days, and you're still not achieving it.
Yeah,
so,
has failed and has taken too long to do what it is doing. Yeah,
with all the repercussions it is creating.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mustafa. Khalil, I noticed something very interesting in your survey when you talk or ask questions about ceasefire talks that we just discussed. Why are there discrepancies or differences from, let's say, expectations in Gaza and expectations in the West Bank with regards to a ceasefire? That is kind of strange.
Well, it is clear that ceasefire is different for West Bank because it brings along with it release of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners. This is why the West Bank in the first survey showed significant rise in support for Hamas that was unprecedented, because none of the previous wars involved an ongoing war and a release of prisoners simultaneously. And the release of prisoners for West Bankers is certainly one of the most important achievements of a ceasefire. While for Gazans, yes, the ceasefire is important, but what Gazans really want is the end of the war. In answer to your earlier question about the difference, why this time it is difficult to reach a ceasefire is because we're not talking about a ceasefire in the same manner as we did in previous wars. We're now talking about a temporary halt in the fighting. We're not talking about a permanent ceasefire. Hamas is talking about a permanent ceasefire. Hamas wants to see the end of the war, while Israel does not. This is a very different vision as to what purpose a ceasefire would achieve that is leading to the current deadlock. As long as there is no agreement that the war needs to end, there will not be an agreement on a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Gazans are obviously are interested in a ceasefire because it would mean certain relief, humanitarian conditions could improve, but they actually are more interested in an end to the war more than a temporary ceasefire in which they would be going back to the war after.
Very interesting. Hanan, Mohammed al-Shinnawi of Voice of America would like to know, do the Palestinians have a definite vision for the day after? When people in the West here keep talking about the day after and Israel dictating its own vision, is there a Palestinian vision? Is the two-state solution still feasible?
Look, I mean, even the formulation the day after, every time anybody asks me this question, I get angry. I find it extremely provocative. Really, the day after what? We are not in a situation now that is static. Things are moving and changing, and the situation is so tragic. And Israel is in many ways using unbridled power and powers of destruction and so on, and is also destabilizing the region and the world, as I said earlier. So what day after? Day after what? If as most of us said, it failed to achieve its objectives. Is it going to continue to try to achieve its objectives? Will it commit total genocide? Does it want to destroy and kill all of the Palestinians of Gaza to make Gaza totally uninhabitable? Does it want to exile the Palestinians, expel them again from Gaza as refugees? Does it want to continue with its gradual ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, the land theft, the building of settlements, the settlers on the rampage, killing people, particularly vulnerable people in rural areas and so on? That's the point, the day after what? And they always look, I was giving an interview to Jim Clancy, and I said, it's like, you know, you drop your coin or your penny in somewhere dark, and then you go look for it under the street light because there's light there. So everybody is looking at the Palestinians. What are you doing? Why do you need to change your government, rejuvenate, and so on? While this fascist, bloodthirsty, genocidal government in Israel is sitting there wreaking havoc everywhere, while this government in the US is giving full support and is being entirely complicit with the genocide and is supplying Israel with the weapons and munitions and so on it needs, everybody turns around and says, well, what about the Palestinian Authority? What kind of reform does it need? What is your agenda? Well, first of all, I'll tell him our first agenda is to end the genocide, to stop it. Stop the genocide. All of us are traumatized. I cannot stand to see children being, pulled out of the rubble in pieces, and women looking for their children and parents looking for their families, their homes totally gone, their schools, their universities, their hospitals. This is unconscionable. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's not time. We are talking about this internally. I think it's a Palestinian issue, but I think it has been used and abused in a way to put the onus, the burden of proof on the Palestinians. You have to prove you are well-behaved, you are democratic, you are absolutely not corrupt and so on. And you are looking at the one government in the coalition government in Israel that is corrupt, that is genocidal, I mean, it's amazing that it's real fascist, and nobody is saying this is where you need to change. And you look at the Biden administration that is talking about, the humanitarian issue, and something has to be done about the Palestinians while it is enabling Israel. I think the American administration has to be questioned. At the same time, I think it is also responsible for destabilizing the whole region. I think Laila alluded to that. But the thing is, you cannot, in a way, absolve all these horrific policies and governments and administrations and so on, and then turn to the victims and say, all right, tell me, what your agenda is. Okay, I don't think there is any people, and I agree with Khalil that we are trying. I mean, we do need to formulate our own agenda, but I don't think there's any people who has been engaged in internal debate and dialogue and discussion everywhere I go, not just in Palestine. I mean, we were in Doha, I think, Laila and Mustafa, and we saw the very, very active and involved discussions on what is the Palestinian national agenda. Look, in terms of words, yes, early on, the PLO had the national unity, the slogans of the PLO, the logo of the PLO is national unity, regional mobilization or regional Arab mobilization, and liberation. These were the three. التحرير الوطني, الوحدة الوطنية, التعبئة القومية, and the third thing was التحرير. It hasn't changed much. You add to it self-determination, you add to it liberation, which is there, and so on, and الاستقلال, independence. These are the ongoing terms of a national agenda that really has not shifted that much. But the way it is interpreted and the differences that took place as a result of shifting realities in the region. For heaven's sake, there are so many now, not just in the region, but in the world. So there are so many changes now as a result of this horrific attack on Gaza. It has exposed, as we discussed earlier, so many fault lines. The East and West fault line, the global South versus the global North, the third world and so on, the deprived and the oppressed versus the governments who think they can persist and continue in this. And with the Iran intervention now, you have even greater instability. The whole region is, I believe, is on the edge of an abyss. And things could easily get out of hand. And the US administration is acting like a bull in a china shop. I mean, really. And then everybody says, okay, you Palestinians promise us you will be, as who was it said, they should become like the Swedes or like Finland before we decide they deserve a state. No, we do have our problems. And I believe it is incumbent upon us to deal with internal shortcomings, with problems, to hold our leadership accountable, to evolve a new leadership and so on. And the national agenda must be based basically on liberation. Unity, but not as a formalistic abstract. Unity in terms of acceptance of diversity, of inclusion, through democratic elections, whenever we can get it. This is the agenda, that we want to be equal to everybody else in terms of having the same rights and freedoms that other people have. And we need to do it also in terms of our own system of governance and so on, internally, without anybody thinking that they can dictate to us who's acceptable and who's not, or they can import powers from outside to rule Gaza or to govern Gaza, or they can select from the Palestinians those who will not give them trouble. I mean, I told them they cannot find a more acquiescent leadership than the one that is in Palestine today. I mean, look, they suffer from the erroneous assumption that if you please the Americans and the Israelis, you're fine, that they will not give you too much trouble. But
it's not working.
Absolutely false, exactly. There are many other erroneous assumptions, including the fact that Palestinians will surrender or succumb, or that you can erase out history and culture, or you can have an economic peace, or shrinking the conflict, or whatever. There are so many erroneous assumptions, or thinking the Americans expressed that the way to Palestinian statehood is through normalization with the Arab world, or through negotiations with the Israelis, the way the spokesperson yesterday, I don't know if it was Kirby or Miller. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They're back to the same old failed cliches and failed policies. And you could say ignorant policies, but I think they are much more insidious than that. I mean, not just ignorant, but they also have ulterior motives in the region. And the American agenda, the same way as the Israeli agenda, both have failed in the region, and everybody's paying the price, and the consequences and repercussions will be felt in the long run.
Leila, we have a question for you from Don Wagner in Chicago. Hello, Don. Thank you for the question. What is being done today, if anything, to revive the PLO as an international democratic representative of the Palestinian people, as it's been hinted at in the last couple of questions? And can really the PA, which replaced it, be replaced?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and this is the question on everybody's mind. And I would like to add to what Hanan said brilliantly. Because, you know, the revival of the PLO is also tied with the day after, right? We've been talking about the revival of the PLO for the past 15 years, if not more, okay? And there have been so many attempts at reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, and so many talks about revival of the PLO. So it is central to the Palestinian national movement, because the Palestinian state project has come to an end. And I think that's where the crisis we are in. We are in a crisis because we know what we tried to fight for the past 13 years is not going to happen. Okay, the Palestinian state project has been important in affirming Palestinian political existence and the right to independence and liberation. It has become clear that this cannot happen through a two-state solution. We need to think of something else. And I think one of the reasons why the revival of the PLO is both desired, pushed for, and prevented is because of what Hannah said, the geriatric leadership that we have. I mean, we have a Palestinian Authority that is not elected. The last time it was elected was in 2006, okay? Is detached from the PLO and actually is trying to undermine the PLO. So the revival of the PLO cannot happen through the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, unless new people come into the Palestinian Authority. So what has been done to revive the PLO is a number of initiatives, and Mustafa is aware of it, and Hanan as well. Various, both grassroots initiatives. We have some in the United States, some also in Lebanon, some also in the Arab world, talking about the revival of the PLO. We have some semi-institutional initiatives, people who are not in the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, who are talking about the importance of trying to convene a Palestinian National Congress again, where we can have new elections, where we can have new debates, where we can decide on a new leadership. But the challenging point is, can you have a revival of the PLO without having first a unified leadership because of the war we're living now? Should we now push first for a unified leadership that will call for a revival of the PLO? Because it is institutional structures that need to be revived. So I think the pressure from below needs to continue, but everybody is aware of the importance of reviving the PLO for the simple fact that the PLO is the only entity that represents all the Palestinians. And here I think it might be helpful for people to look a little bit in history. You know, if you remember, the PLO was created in 1964 by the Arab League, okay? And it was completely taken over after the 67 war and the Battle of Karama in 68 by the Palestinian guerrillas. In other words, it's political Palestinian resisting on the ground, taking over institutional structure that better represents them. I think now we're witnessing something similar, but we don't know where it's going to lead us to, because the assault on the Palestinian, on a Palestinian resistance, regionally and internationally, is massive. In 67, the war of 67 was devastating. on everybody. It was one of the worst war, even worse than 48. I mean, not worse than 48. We cannot make comparison because every war is just as bad. But the difference in 67 is that Arab countries, for a small window, took advantage of Palestinians taking arms and supported them in reclaiming their right and their resistance. And that, in a way, facilitated the revival of the PLO with bodies which were much more representative of the Palestinian people. So what needs to happen today is, can you do this takeover of the PLO without military factions? And actually, many people believe that they should. We should not forget the BDS movement is a very important grassroots movement. We should not forget the women's movement, the youth movement. There is all these, various grassroots mass mobilizations, but they're not having institutional representation because those holding the key to the PLO institutional representation are not interested in reviving it. So unless there is a coup from within the PA, which everybody is waiting for, not talking about, don't know how to do, because also we are much more fragmented geographically than we have ever been. And paradoxically, because people forget that we existed in the 1960s and 70s without internet, in the diaspora, without email, and we still led a revolution. And now we have all the internet, all the international solidarity, and yet there is a political fragmentation. So the short answer to your question, yeah, there are various attempts, have been going on for very long. Have they succeeded? Not yet. Why not? Because of the division. Are they likely to succeed? I believe yes, but not with this leadership. We need new bodies, new people, more youth and more women, because they're working on it, and the question is, when are they going to take over? That's what we're waiting for.
Okay, Mustafa, we have a question for you, addressed to you from Imad Salim, who's an American Palestinian activist in the Texas Democratic Party, and would like to know that transparency is a big problem in the PA, as we just heard. And how do you correct that? And is the PA currently really capable of doing that? What role can the factions, and you've been involved in that for a long time, Mustafa. Can you answer him in terms of what role can the faction play to help with that lack of transparency and need for reform? Microphone.
Mustafa, you're muted.
Sorry again. I wanted to comment a little bit about the previous question, but it relates actually to the new question.
Go ahead.
First of all, we the Palestinians as people, as groups, as political groups, face a very difficult challenge, because from one side, we want to preserve our right to represent ourselves as people. We don't want any other country in the region or outside the region to come and say, I speak on behalf of Palestinians, because that would mean selling out our cause. That makes the situation very difficult, because the only body that is accepted internationally and recognized as a representative of Palestinians is the PLO. But on the other hand, the PLO, there was another question asking whether it was a democratic, is it a democratic? PLO was never democratic. Let's be honest with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But PLO led the Palestinian national struggle, and it gained its legitimacy from being the leader of the Palestinian national resistance, starting from 1967 in particular, maybe a little bit before, but mainly since 1967, after Al-Karama, after the change in the Palestinian National Council. The legitimacy of the PLO came from representing and actually leading the national struggle. So the legitimacy can come from two sources, either democratic legitimacy from elections or legitimacy from leading the national struggle. Today, the PLO has neither. It neither has a democratic legitimacy, nor it is having a national legitimacy, because it is not leading the Palestinian struggle. it has made, I mean, this kind of leadership has made itself an obstacle practically to the Palestinian struggle. And that's why I think there is no way of getting out of this situation except through free democratic elections that would allow Palestinians to choose their representatives inside and outside. There are lots of complexities here, but that's what we agreed about in our meetings in Cairo, that there will be a new Palestinian National Council consisting of 350 people, 150 elected in the occupied territories and becoming also the PLC, and 200 others elected outside wherever it's possible, wherever it's not possible, find ways of having an actual representation. This is the plan, but actually this leadership doesn't want it and is obstructing it. And of course, it's not transparent at all. And when you speak about Palestinian factions, it is a grave mistake to put everybody in the same basket, because you have now factions who are in the leadership of the PLO, those who have members in the executive committee of the PLO, and those carry the same responsibility of all the failures that are happening. And there are others who are in opposition, like PFLP, like Palestinian National Initiative, who are in opposition to this leadership and are not in the executive committee and are playing a different role. And I think this is showing actually in the different polls. So we can't talk about factions as if they are all the same and playing the same role and all very old or very young, etc. There are differences. And I think there can be no reform as long as PLO is completely co-opted by the Palestinian National Authority, or the Palestinian Authority to be precise. The PA has consumed the PLO. The PLO has become an expense in the budget of the Palestinian National Authority. It has no independence anymore. And of course, everything is led from one center. And I think it's a true joke when you look at the new government that is formed in Palestine and claim that this is a step towards reform. Actually, it's a regression, not a step forward, in every sense of the word. I don't want to go into more details, but the reality is that since we cannot have elections today because of the war that is happening in Gaza, and because we need to prepare for elections, and by the way, I am 100% convinced, had we have elections in 2021, which the PA canceled, which United States opposed, which Israel obstructed, which many governments maybe in the region also were against it. Had we have these elections, we would not have had this war.
Yes.
I am 100% sure of that. And that should be emphasized, by the way, publicly. But I am saying, since we cannot have elections now, we should have a temporary unified leadership where all the parties would be represented, all the groups would be represented, civil society should be represented, and Hamas should be there. If we have a unified leadership, it can prepare for elections later. But now, without a unified leadership, we are carrying a very huge risk of losing our right of self-representation.
Khalil, I have a tough question for you. An anonymous attendee would like to know, what was the purpose of Hamas's October 7 attack? I know you do not represent Hamas or the organizers of the October 7 attack, but in your judgment as an academic, what was the strategy and have these goals been achieved is a question.
The goal was to strengthen Hamas's position in its negotiations with Israel over making Gaza an independent mini-state under Hamas's control. I have no doubt that these negotiations were underway, and that Hamas by then, due to the cancellation of the elections by the Palestinian leadership in April 21, Hamas came to the conclusion that it needed to strengthen its control over Gaza, and that the unification of the West Bank and Gaza was not going to happen as long as the current Palestinian leadership stays in office, and that there will be no elections in the future that would allow the Palestinians through these elections to elect a unified leadership for both the West Bank and Gaza. At that point, I think Hamas leadership decided that it wants to strengthen its control over Gaza, and that the only choice it had was to negotiate a long-term hudna or deal with Israel that would give Hamas the ability, the viable political economy that would allow it to control Gaza and deliver services. The problem is that Hamas perhaps estimated the extent to which the Israeli army was preoccupied with settlers and West Bank issues, rather than with protecting the Israeli communities on the borders with Gaza. And that the attack that it planned to be a limited offensive, and I think Hamas selected October the 7th for that purpose, to send a signal that it is like Sadat's October the 6th offensive, a limited offensive in search for a limited accommodation, that was Hamas's goal, a limited offensive that would lead to a limited accommodation, leading to a long-term hudna and a greater Hamas control and a more viable political economy. The failure of the strategy was it succeeded too much. It ended with a disaster for the Israelis. Hamas members and many civilians committed atrocities on the Israeli side of the borders because no one was there to stop them, and because there was no control at all. Hamas did not expect to see no Israeli army fighting on the other side of the border. And that meant that that strategy collapsed the minute there was no Israelis fighting on the other side. And it ended with a situation in which Israel came to the conclusion Israel would not agree with my assessment of why Hamas launched the war. Israel thinks Hamas launched the war because it wants to eliminate the state of Israel. Of course, this is rubbish. Hamas is a very rational actor. It knows that it cannot achieve that. It knows that it can only achieve limited goals and objectives in negotiations with Israel. And that, I believe, is what it aimed at. Nonetheless, Israel came to the conclusion now that Hamas poses a significant threat and it must be eliminated, thereby essentially destroying Hamas's strategy in launching this war. The failure was not something due to a conspiracy by any side, but it was the reality that the Israelis were busy in the West Bank, did not expect Hamas, underestimated Hamas' resolve, underestimated Hamas's capacity, and paid the price for it. Similarly, Hamas paid the price for thinking that it can, through that frontal assault on communities and military bases on the Israeli side with more than 3,000 men, that it would be able still to get back to a negotiating table with the Israelis, who have the capacity to eliminate it as a military force if they want to. And so we ended with a situation in which the Israelis have to go after Hamas rather than negotiate with Hamas. Again, that's an outcome that was unintended by Hamas, certainly unintended by Israel.
Thank you, Khalil. There is a follow-up question for you on that. Where does Hamas go from here? I mean, we've talked about where does the Palestine national movement as a whole go forward or from here. How do you answer that? Where does Hamas go from here?
As long as neither Israel nor the Palestinian Authority nor the international community have a solid, viable plan for the future of Gaza after the war, Hamas will stay in control of Gaza on a de facto basis. It is the reason Israel is not talking about the so-called day after is because Israel does not want to acknowledge an alternative arrangement for Palestinian control over both the West Bank and Gaza, leading to a two-state solution. The reason Israel supported and helped Hamas to consolidate its control over Gaza before October the 7th is to prevent that outcome. Why would Israel now change its mind? And therefore, in terms of the strategic outlook, Hamas is less of a threat. Hamas in Gaza is less of a threat than a unified Palestinian leadership that has control over both the West Bank and Gaza. On a de facto basis, today, Hamas controls Gaza. Israel does not. Hamas bureaucracy, Hamas military, Hamas police, Hamas civil institutions are still functioning despite all the destruction. Without this continued Hamas control, the conditions in Gaza would deteriorate to a humanitarian catastrophe immediately. It is Hamas that keeps Gaza today, that keeps Gaza together. The Israelis can hurt it, they can damage it significantly, but the reality is the minute the Israeli army leaves a town or an area, Hamas immediately resumes control over that area. And that will remain the case until there is an alternative to continued Hamas control over Gaza. Hamas, therefore, since I can't see that alternative being agreed to anytime soon, with or without a ceasefire, Hamas will continue to control Gaza as long as Israel doesn't want to. So far, Israel has not indicated that it wants to permanently control Gaza, or that even long term, that is to actually manage Gaza, provide civil control, not just security control. As long as that is the case, then Hamas remains in power and in control of Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority will not be able to do that. It cannot challenge Hamas. If it tries, Hamas will fight back and will prevent the Palestinian Authority from asserting any control. Any control by the Palestinian Authority over Gaza can only come in negotiations and with the consent of Hamas. Anything else isn't going to work. So Israel doesn't want that. So what does Israel want? Implicitly, it means that Israel actually still wants Hamas to remain in control. It might wish to have other alternatives to that, but none of those are viable. The only viable alternative, the only party that actually wants to control Gaza today is Hamas. And so Hamas will have it and will control Gaza, will continue to control Gaza. So Hamas is not going anywhere. Despite the total destruction of Gaza and the total destruction of its military force, there will be a residual military force in under Hamas's control, and a huge bureaucracy that it has and commands that will continue to run Gaza with continued Israeli aggression and war and without.
Thank you, Khalil. Hanan, you wanted to add something, right? Or is not?
No, I'm listening. Very interesting.
No, I saw the hand up, so I thought you wanted to add something.
No, it's okay. But I was under the impression that Hamas was quite flexible when it came to, let's say, the post or the interim during the genocide now that's ongoing. In the discussions, Hamas accepted a government of national accord, of not necessarily of factional accord, but of national accord, right? They said they are quite willing to accept, not technocrats, but we say professionals, national professionals. And they also would accept entering into the construct and into the system of the PLO as members of the PLO, both Hamas and even Islamic Jihad. They also said they are willing to have elections down the line. So these were the three statements that Hamas made in negotiations internally or in preparation for negotiations externally. So given that, why is it? I think that when we talk about the PA and the PLO, the PA is nothing but a government, a system of, because the PA was supposed to be a legislative council, and a system of governance, as well as a judiciary. And now everything, the judiciary and the legislative council are under the control of the presidency, not even the PA. So when we talk about the PA, we're talking about this government, which is called the government, which is not elected but chosen. We don't have an independent judiciary because the presidency has taken it over and changed the law. And we, in many cases, we don't have the PA as envisioned. And people talk about it as though it's an all-encompassing political system. It is not. The political decision making has been taken over by the presidency and a few people, right? The PLO that was supposed to take the political decisions has been totally sidelined. And they are supposed to accept the presidential decisions and then present them as the PLO, as PLO decisions. So even the PA, in my opinion, does not exist in all its components. It exists only as a government and totally under the control of the president.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? We go back to the PLO if we really want to begin the process of repairing the political system.
Can I say
Thank
something
you.
to that? Because
Yeah,
I thought
please
the
go ahead,
discussion
ma'am.
of Khalil was brilliant and spot on. But I also would like to say that Hamas is not just Hamas. I mean, I think people need to think of it as Hamas being the issue of resistance. And the issue of resistance is central to the Palestinians. Now, what Hamas represented is the military form of resistance that, as Khalil explained very well, it did not expect that success between Tacoma of October 7th and was calculating in different terms. But after 6 months, after nearly 200 years of war, what do we find? Even, I mean, people are tired of the war. People do not want the war, of course. But the PA, or rather, as Hanan said very brilliantly, the executive branch of bunch of thugs, excuse my language, okay, hijacked the leadership of what's happening in the West Bank, have lost legitimacy. They're still in power because Israel is financing them, and because there's still some attachment that we're better off at managing ourselves as a municipality. So the way I see it is that actually the problem is more the PA than Hamas. Hamas is now, of course, under attack. But Hamas has shown, whether we like it or not, much more flexibility and much more political astuteness, and also maybe some major military mistakes compared to the PA. So the real question that is facing us is what is going to happen to this leadership of the PA in the West Bank, which is sustained by forces not democratic or popular, but by forces which are regional and Israel also motivated. I think we need to think of the very short term and a little bit of the less short term. Over the next 6 months, maybe this is going to be sustainable. But over the next 3 years, I do not see this sustainable at all. And from the outside, at least, it seems to me, there is a party which, as Khalil explained, is not going anywhere. It's going to become weaker militarily, but because it is much more than a military wing. And also when we say Hamas bureaucracy, or when we say Hamas administration, it's actually the administration of Gaza. I think it's unfair to call it a Hamas administration. It's the administration of Gaza who are trying their best to run the affairs of the people in Gaza in ways that seemed before October 7th under much harder conditions and in a sense more rentable or more less corrupt than what happening in the Palestinian Authority. This is just to say that it's a question of system of governance. Hamas has proved that it has a system of governance that worked under very hard conditions. The PA is showing that it has a system of government that is sustained by international aid and is corrupt and inefficient and became a tool of the occupation. How sustainable this will be is what we're confronting with. But the facts that we are going to deal with in the long term is that, as also Mustafa explained, we have a delegitimized executive that is being sustained on life support. And we have a political party in Gaza that has an administration that worked, but now is going to be busy for the next 10 years just dealing with humanitarian catastrophe. But on the political element, on the political discussion, we still have the PLO, and we still have push for reviving the PLO. And as Mustafa explained very well, there are initiatives to call for a Palestinian National Congress to take place. And these are only going to become louder, not weaker. So we are in a historical moment where we're going to see who's going to push more, who's going to organize better, how you're going to, but everything is shifting, and it's now on the most astute political analyst or political party to capitalize on these changes that are happening. I'll leave it at that because.
Thank you.
I have one little correction.
Yeah,
please.
Mustafa, go ahead.
It's a small thing. The Israelis are not financing the PLO, the Palestinian Authority. It's we, the people, who are financing the Palestinian Authority. 90%, and it's not even the international community. 90% of the budget of the PA comes from people's taxes.
Taxes.
And Israel is taking away part of that tax revenue and keeping it in an act of piracy, actually, in which now they make Norway a partner in the process. But in general, yes, the PA could not be sustained without Israeli acceptance and Western government support. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just the international aid, the amount of aid that was flown into the West Bank and Gaza, but more in the West Bank. You know, we had it up until COVID. It represented nearly 20% of the GDP. Who on earth gets $1 billion? We got $1 billion between 2012 until 2020. This is massive sustaining. Now, of course, I agree with you. It's the Palestinian people financing the PA. But what I want to say, the problem of the Palestinian Authority is that we need to admit that it became municipal. It's a municipal governance, which is important. I don't deny it. It's important. But it has not been able to serve the Palestinian people in an effective way.
Yeah, but we have to remember, it's not even a municipality authority. It's an authority without authority. It's an authority under occupation. Exactly like the situation today in Gaza, by the way. What has happened during these 6 months is that Israel reoccupied Gaza and West Bank. I mean, whatever spots were left not occupied are now reoccupied in West Bank. Thank you.
Yeah,
By the way,
to be more precise, the Bantustan. It's like South Africa. What we have is a Bantustan. And let's name it like this. So let's go back to saying we are in an apartheid reality, and what we have achieved is a Bantustan authority. And the only way how we can get out of this Bantustan and apartheid reality is something different.
I think one has to be fair, even if you elect the best people. The PA was responsible for building institutions and delivering services, and it was supposed to do this equally within the West Bank and Gaza. It never had sovereignty or attributes of sovereignty. It wasn't in the agreements, it wasn't in Oslo or anything else. So in a sense, the expectations were rather limited, and because it agreed to work under occupation, its powers were severely restricted and curtailed. So it couldn't, you cannot pretend that this is another misconception, that you can set up a structure or a system of governance under occupation, and that it can function as a perfect democracy when all the decision-making is in the hands of a hostile military occupation. Where you go, crossing points, what you import, who are the people who can come in, who can have, they control the land register, the population register, freedom, everything. So even if we have elections, let's be real here. We cannot expect a system of governance that would act in a way that other sovereign or free states do act. They'll always be tainted by this. Also, to be fair, there were areas of cooperation between the West Bank and Gaza. I think the health system and the educational system were totally linked. Again, part of the revenues were being used to pay salaries of people in Gaza and so on. But there was never really a total rift, as you know. And it is very clear that if we want to fix or remedy the problems, we have to take into account the fact that there are limits to sovereignty and service delivery and so on, and that you cannot run Gaza alone and the West Bank alone. If you want to have a real functioning political system that is genuinely representative and legitimate, it has to be done in a comprehensive way. And I think also the Palestinians outside in exile or in refugee camps or wherever, they have to be part of this system.
Thank you for this frank exchange. Just wanted to let you know that we are down to about 59 questions left.
That's all?
That's all we have left. So give me some shorter answers, and I will try to accommodate, out of respect for all the participants who send their questions, accommodate as many as possible. I'm sure we're not going to be able to do 59, but at any rate, Khalil, Ian Drummond would like to know how possible is it to accurately poll opinion in Gaza with the current circumstances? How did you guys do it?
Good question. We weren't sure that we would be able to do it without a ceasefire in place. It is mainly, we weren't worried about people not wanting to talk. And because we actually found out that people do want to talk, that in fact in Gaza, the margin, the rejection rate, our rejection rate, the number of people who declined to be interviewed was actually lower than it is normally found in our surveys. So, however, doing it without a ceasefire in place, we were worried that people would be reluctant to talk, and this was not the case. The main problem for us was the safety of our data collectors and the sampling process, whether we can have a good sample of Northerners. Northerners, of course, most of Northerners have moved to the South, and we were able to interview them. So that in terms of the size was, or the number of people, was proportionate to the actual size of population in the various districts of the Gaza Strip. Nonetheless, people in the north might have had different views about things than Northerners who were in shelters in the south. That was our main concern, and this is why we increased the sample. We actually doubled the size of the sample so that we would be able to see variations if there are among Northerners in the South. That was the goal, is to see how wide the gap is in attitudes among Northerners who have moved into the South, which would have given us an idea of have we done the survey in the North, would we have been able to capture things that we have not captured in the current survey. We did not find that. We came to the conclusion that Northerners we interviewed did represent the views of Northerners who stayed home. And the reason, I mean, we did find a lot of people who have suffered, who actually gave more support to the Hamas's decision to launch the war, and who were more willing to support Hamas than those who did not. Remember, in our survey, we asked people whether they have anybody lost, anybody killed, and anybody injured. And those who said they have family members who were killed were 60%. So we looked at the 60% and how they responded to the questions, whether they felt that they would. We wanted to know whether they supported Hamas, for example, less or more, whether they supported Hamas's decision to launch the offensive on October the 7th, more or less. We found more support rather than less support. So the idea that more suffering meant less support for Hamas, we could not confirm. Even though we still have to grapple with the question of why did support for Hamas go down then, if it is not because of the pain and suffering that Gazans were feeling. But nonetheless, the findings clearly do not show at all any correlation between suffering, in this case, death of family members, and support for Hamas. The correlation is on the opposite side. That is, there is more support for it. Okay, so I'm just giving you these examples just to come to the conclusion that conducting the survey, other than the sampling issue and the safety of our data collectors, we really did not face any major difficulty. The sampling difficulty had to do with the fact that we needed to find satellite images of all the shelters that were irregular. We had all the data we needed on the shelters that were regular, that is the government shelters, UNRWA shelters, and shelters that were managed by known humanitarian organizations or civil society groups. And what we did not have data on was dozens of shelters that did not have any of these attributes, and no one was running them officially. And the only way we could sample this community was by looking at satellite photos to actually count a number of individuals, divide these images into blocks, and selecting our sample from within the blocks. It was doable at the end of the day. But so if I take one more minute to say, why did we do the survey under conditions of war rather than after a ceasefire? This was not the plan. The plan was that there would be, this is our wishful thinking, obviously, that there would be a ceasefire on the first day of Ramadan. So the plan was we would conduct half of the interviews before Ramadan and the other half after Ramadan, so that we would capture the change that might be there during a ceasefire and before a ceasefire was in place. We wanted to see what we did not see in the first survey, which was during a ceasefire. And so we estimated that there would be differences, and we wanted to capture those differences. Unfortunately, 2 days before Ramadan, we came to the conclusion that there would be no ceasefire. And so we continued data collection, including during the first days of Ramadan, without a ceasefire in place. So this was an outcome that we really didn't plan, but we ended up with that situation.
Thank you, Khalil. Mustafa, you have a question from Renee Spitz, a scholar from the Netherlands. You mentioned in your remarks the impact of the war in Gaza on the Arab region and the disappointing, if you will, Arab response or Arab leadership response. But what does all of this mean to the Palestinian refugees, especially in the suggestions that you guys have made, like in countries like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc., talking about solutions? Are these solutions going to include them, and how?
Well, first of all, we have to see that there is a huge attack on UNRWA today, I mean, in relationship to refugees, because the main goal of this attack of Israel and partially some other countries is to liquidate the Palestinian right of return, the rights of these refugees to return back to the place they were displaced from. And I think strategically, I think when we talk about what motivated Hamas to act, there were several other things that were not mentioned. And to be fair, they have to be mentioned. It wasn't just about Hamas wanting to be in control of Gaza. One has to see that before the attack that took place on the 7th of October, Israel was declaring worldwide that it is liquidating the Palestinian nation through normalization with Arab countries. And it was one last stop they had to go to, which is Saudi Arabia, and then the process will be finished. And the most resembling act to this matter was what Netanyahu declared in the United Nations General Assembly just 2 weeks before the 7th of October. In front of the whole world, he presented the map of the new Middle East for 50 years to come, which included all Arab countries in green as countries they have normalized with or are going to normalize with. And then in the center, Israel in blue, which includes the total annexation of West Bank and Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights. That was what was happening just before the 7th of October. And I believe that the issue of exchange of prisoners was a very serious matter on the mind of a person like Sinwar, who himself was released through an act of exchange with Shalit, if you remember. So these are factors that have to be taken into consideration. And in my opinion, sorry?
Al-Aqsa Mosque and the way the people were treated there, the worship.
The attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque, the attacks on Jerusalem, and the PA propaganda and some other political parties' propaganda. Where is Hamas? What is Gaza doing for the West Bank? All of that, of course, you have to take it into consideration. But regarding the Palestinian refugees and the diaspora, I personally don't believe anymore in any solution that doesn't include the return of the refugees. I don't believe, let me say, I wrote an article in May last year on the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, saying that the two-state solution is dead. Israel killed it. And I don't know what they will do now in the Security Council. Now the Israeli representative has just said that if Security Council recognizes a Palestinian state, it will be a council of terrorists. Imagine. And I don't think the United States would let it pass. I will be extremely surprised if they do so. But I think you cannot speak about two-state solution. It's a hypocrisy unless you call for the end of occupation and call for the end and removal of all settlements from the occupied territories and recognition of Jerusalem as a capital of Palestine. Otherwise, it's nonsense. It's just hypocrisy. And in my opinion, the Palestinian national goal has to be changed. It has to include not only the right of Palestinians to be free from the system of occupation and apartheid, but the future will be guaranteed. Peace will happen only if if the whole settler colonial project is defeated. Without that, we will not have any future, any future of peace. And I think the refugees are a very important part of the Palestinian formula. The reality is that what happened after the 7th of October, I think this was mentioned by Layla, what happened after the 7th of October, that it brought us back to the roots of the problem, that what we face here is not just occupation, not just apartheid, it's a settler colonial project that wants to eliminate the Palestinian presence completely.
Thank you, Mustafa. Hanan, you've dealt with Western media for many, many years. You have as much experience as anybody else in doing that. In this conflict, it seems like on purpose, the Western media is willing to cover everything in Gaza except Hamas. Like, we don't hear anything about anybody being interviewed or talking on behalf of Hamas, explaining Hamas's policy. We see all the atrocities and some of the results that happen every day. A lot of Israeli experts and government officials talking. Are you getting better coverage in the region through the Arabic media than we are getting in the West?
Of course, the Arabic media does cover Hamas, and does have spokespeople, and does have fighters even, and they do have footage also from operations by fighters and by Hamas. So there is no lack of coverage in the Arab world and in the Arab media, including some English-speaking channels. But Western media is a whole different ballgame. Western media has immediately recruited itself, volunteered to give the Israeli narrative, to adopt the Israeli diction, discourse, and even lies. And I have many cases and examples of how they did that. And they also were influenced and adopted the official American narrative. Remember when October 7th took place? Immediately, everybody was talking about beheaded 40 babies, children, babies burned, and so on, and mass rape and all that. And that was swallowed hook, line, and sinker by Biden. He repeated it, and Blinken repeated it, and the all Western media, without exception, repeated it without bothering to get some verification or proof or anything. And I kept asking Western journalists, where did you get this information? Give us proof. And they'd say, from the Israeli military spokesperson. Did you see these things? Did you see burned babies or beheaded babies or mass rape and so on? And then gradually, the truth started coming out, and Western media resisted even trying to adopt the true narrative. I mean, I'm sure there were some atrocities. I'm sure there were things. This was a situation of war. And you did have Hamas, who are, by the way, the fighters are much more disciplined. They were out there on a military mission. They weren't out there, trying to commit atrocities. And it became very clear. First of all, there were people who were not fighters, who when they saw the walls opening, they rushed out and went into the camps and settlements. But also the fact that many of the Israelis were killed by the Israeli tanks and gunships because they followed what they call the Hannibal doctrine, which is, you know, if you are being taken hostage, if you kill the hostage with the hostage taker. And this happened, and now they are admitting it. Now the truth is gradually coming out. But the Western media is finding it extremely difficult to rectify or to adjust their own narrative. Now, the fact that they're not allowed to go into Gaza makes them more susceptible to the Israeli organized versions that keep coming out and that they are being fed. And some of them may go in only if they are embedded with the Israeli army. So they get the Israeli army version. They are allowed to see only what the Israelis tell them to see. And then they come out. And of course, the official, and I was really shocked to see how the American administration did interfere in the freedom of expression and freedom of the media, because they did tell them what can be said and what can't, and what terms should they avoid and what terms they shouldn't, and so on. So in this great grand democracy, you see the manipulation of public perceptions and discourse. So I personally, I didn't want to see any Western reporter. For a few days, I didn't talk to any of them because the racism, the sense of superiority and condescension, the fact that they wanted to try off their virtuosity against you, made me really reluctant to want to even dignify any person who had sunk to such depths to give them an interview. Only after a while, I gave a few interviews, like, you know, what's his name, Piers Morgan and others. I refused to talk to. I really absolutely refuse, because I don't want to give him the opportunity, or others like him, all the white Zionists, to be able to say, well, you see, look what we did. We engaged the Palestinian. We have two sides and so on, or to try to even test your moral fiber. I don't like that. And I don't want to give them that opportunity. It's not my, I mean, it doesn't in many ways respond or appeal to my own sense of integrity, of journalistic integrity, because I have no respect for them, frankly speaking. And so I give interviews very rarely, once in a while, to people I respect, because I want to be able to have a respectful, calm exchange of ideas. I want to respect people who want to know and relay the facts, not people who want to challenge you and put you in your place. I think that's not the role of media. So it's unfortunate, but even now, even with horrific pictures and footage coming out, still many Americans and Western audience tell me they don't get the whole story, that the coverage is still very slanted and biased, that the choice of words, that there are certain words not allowed, and so on. So it will take some time before they have access to the truth. But what did make a difference is are the social media channels and so on that are accessible and available and that people made use of. And now, as you know, there are people who want to close off TikTok, for heaven's sake. So having access to information and to live footage and to the voices of the Palestinians, even though, over 130 Palestinian journalists were killed, yes, along with many of them with their families, to the point where they don't sleep at home, or they don't rent places in buildings. They sleep outside in order to save people who might be shelled along with them. So the Palestinian journalists have been incredibly courageous. They took real risks, and they did get the narrative and the images and the story out. But the problem with all of us is that day in and day out, you are seeing the horrors of this genocide. And it has had I think all of us, as I said, are traumatized. It has had a tremendous impact on the collective psyche of all Palestinians everywhere.
Thank you, Hanan. As you guys probably noticed, I'm not sure, that we had some competition at the UN the same time when we started our program. The vote was scheduled the vote on Palestine was scheduled today. It's still ongoing. Mustafa, if that passes, I mean, what is the significance of this recognition? Microphone.
Hope it passes, and it doesn't relate to the issue of two-state solution or one-state solution. Because if it passes, it creates a situation that Palestine is a country, is a state under occupation. And that by itself has very important significance. And this will really put the Israeli side in a very awkward position. Not that many Western governments will change their approach and attitude immediately, but I think it will consolidate the fact, re-establish the fact that there is occupation. And also it will hit very hard the Israeli efforts to liquidate and completely destroy the Palestinian issue. It will add to the right of the Palestinian people and their demand for self-determination. And that is very important. Of course, it will not say what are the borders of the state. It will not say all of the rest, because we know that Trump has called for a Palestinian state. And when you look at the map of what he has proposed, I wrote a whole book about his plan. And it's really interesting to analyze every part of it, because what he presented is clusters of Bantustans under the Israeli control. And so it's not enough to say there is a state. One has to ask the question about whether it's a sovereign state or not, whether it's a contiguous state or not, whether it's a state that really meets the needs of the Palestinians for self-determination. But given the situation today, it will be a useful thing to get, and I'm afraid we will not get it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mustafa. With that, our time is up. We still have 70 more people with questions.
You need another session.
Thanks to you guys. We need another session. We actually have one scheduled based on what you mentioned earlier. The younger generation is going to be in the next panel. And so thank you so much, Layla, Hanan, Mustafa, Khalil. Appreciate your time. Thank you for the hundreds of people who joined us and for the thousands who would be looking at this program on social media afterwards. And Arab Center basically will continue to schedule events of this caliber and this type. We're in touch, so you stay in touch, please. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Khalil. Thank you, everybody.